Hey guys, Nandhini here with the goanchesstrio. Welcome to the series of games of Akiba Rubinstein. In the previous video, we had a look at Rubinstein's immortal game. The link is in the description box below for those who have not checked it out. Today, we are going to have a look at one of Rubinstein's endgame mastery. In the year 1909, Rubinstein tied with that time world champion Emanuel Lasker to win the Great St. Petersburg tournament. He also beat Emanuel Lasker in the very same tournament. His play in that tournament was so magical and effortless, and he also started gaining a reputation of being a really strong endgame player. Today, we are going to have a look at another game from the very same tournament where he plays the white pieces against Jack Mises. d4, d5, knight f3, c5, c4, knight f6. The move e6 is also possible in this position, and it is the more common reply, the classical response, transposing to the main line the Tarash defense. But Mises usually preferred to play more open and active positions and would take the risk of losing a tempo just to get the desired outcome. So he chose knight f6. Now, what do I mean by losing a tempo? We see it right here after cd5, cd4, knight d4, knight d5. Now this position is symmetrical, but this is white to move and this makes a huge difference. So Rubinstein continued with e4 and now this gains a tempo because the pawn's in the center attacking the knight and the bishop is also on its way out. So knight f6 attacking the pawn, knight c3 developing the knight and defending the pawn. And here Mises chose to play e5, immediately questioning the knight and hoping for the knight to move, because here if the knight does move, for example knight b3, black is hoping to get this queen into d1, and after king into d1 black is happy with the position and white has actually lost castling. Please keep in mind knight into d1 is not possible over here because the knight will just capture e4 for free. So going back, Rubinstein played bishop b5 correctly in this position, and after bishop d7, now I would request you all to pause the video and try to figure out how Rubinstein may have continued. So Rubinstein plays a really nice move, knight f5, taking the knight even closer to the black king. The knight is really safe on f5 because the bishop on d7 is pinned and therefore cannot capture the knight on f5. And when Rubinstein plays the move knight f5, he's also sacrificing the e4 pawn. But Mises did not go for the pawn. But let's just see what happens if he did. So bishop into b5, black will lose castling in the process of winning the pawn. And after bishop e3, the black king is uncastled and white is having enough compensation for the pawn, and black has to play very accurately to even hold the position. So going back, Mises very rightly did not go for it and he continued with knight c6, simply developing the knight. And now Rubinstein goes knight d6. So now I'm sure you all understood the idea with knight f5. So after knight d6, check, bishop into d6, queen into d6. The queen is well placed on d6, not allowing the black king to castle. And it's not just that, white is also having an immediate threat of bishop into c6, and winning the e5 pawn. So Mises correctly defends everything with the move queen e7. And after queen into e7, knight into e7, Rubinstein continues development with bishop e3. Bishop into b5 is nothing to worry about because white has knight into b5. And after bishop e3 comes a6, attacking the bishop. So bishop into d7, knight into d7. And now this position may look equal, but Rubinstein played this game so effortlessly and beautifully and actually converted this into a win. I would request you all to pause the video here and try to figure out how white should continue. So Rubinstein continued with king e2. And he has kept the king in the center and has not castled. The king is as safe on e2 as it would have been on the g1 square. In fact, the king is better placed on e2 because it is closer to the center, and having an active king in the endgame is what every player should look for. So after king e2 came rook c8, taking the semi-open c file. White did the same with rook hd1, taking the d file, and also not allowing black to castle immediately. The point of castling is, after castling, the rook immediately comes into the game, right? From the f8 square. But that is not possible over here. And here black played knight c5. And here again, I would request you all to pause the video and try to figure out if you can think like Rubinstein. So here Rubinstein played a very interesting move, very nice move, bishop into c5, giving up his bishop for the knight, a very unexpected exchange. But this was very typical of Rubinstein's endgame technique. He would have already thought so many moves in depth and therefore captured bishop into knight. Now we go back, let us try to see what could have been one of the reasons. One of the reasons could be black can play knight e6, knight c6 and take control of the d4 square. That is one possible reason. And well, the other reasons we will get to know on move 19 and move number 25 and even further on. And this is move number 17. So let's just keep it there. So after bishop c5, rook c5, white continued rook a c1. Again, not allowing the black king to castle. Because if black does go castling, this would be a blunder because white has knight d5, double attack. And if black goes for the rook trade, white first captures e7 with a check and then captures the rook, and white is simply up a piece. So Mises did not fall for this and continued with knight c6 instead, heading towards the d4 square. And here again, please pause the video and try to figure out white's next move. So here Rubinstein continued with rook d5, a really good move in this position. And black does not have too many of options here. One is rook into d5, one is rook c4. The move rook c4, the rook just seems to be very awkwardly placed here, and this does not help black. So he chose to go with rook into d5 instead, which seems very logical. And after e into d5, white has already created a pass pawn, which is very important in the endgame. And here knight d4, getting the knight to d4 and towards the center. And yes, instead of knight d4, maybe knight d7 would give black maybe some more chances in the game, but he would have to play very passively. So he chose knight d4 and the king comes even further towards the center with king d3. And now white has an immediate threat of rook e1 and winning the e5 pawn. So black says, I'm going to get my king to the center too. I don't need to castle. This is the endgame. So king e7, heading towards the d6 square actually. And here, pause the video and try to calculate 2-3 moves and let's see if you can think like Rubinstein. So here Rubinstein goes with f4. Pawn into f4 is not possible because then the knight on d4 would fall. So here black plays f6, f into e5, f into e5, and now white has successfully isolated and weakened black's e-pawn, which can be easily attacked by the white pieces. And after f e5 comes the move king e4, centralizing the king and attacking the e5 pawn. King d6 defending the pawn, and now is move number 25, guys, and Rubinstein goes rook f1. So he has foreseen all these moves when he played the move bishop into c5 earlier. So after rook f1, a good move, taking control of the f-file, the white rook will penetrate to the 7th rank and create a lot of threats. So here, black also plays a good move rook c8 because that is where he's going to get counterplay, and rook f7. And here black continued with rook c4, trying to create some counterplay over here and trying to get the rook into the game. But instead of rook c4, maybe knight b5 would have been a more practical choice to try to hold the position, because with the knights off the board, this gives black more chances to hold this game to a draw. And with the knights on the board, it just increases the chances of white to win the game. So anyway, rook c4 is not bad either. King d3, rook b4, now defending the pawn and attacking the b2 pawn. And in this position, Rubinstein continued with rook into g7, says, I don't care about the b2 pawn, but B3 was also possible over here, and white would still have an advantage, a slight advantage, but Rubinstein chose the best move, and that is rook into g7. And after rook into b2, rook into h7, rook into g2, there has been a trade of pawns, but that's not it. Along with the d pass pawn, white has also gained the h pass pawn, and this will make a whole difference in the position. So after rook into g2, Rubinstein played rook h6 check, kicking the king even further behind. But here he just repeated it for another move, and we are back to the same position. And here again, try to pause the video and figure out how should white continue. So here Rubinstein again sacrifices another pawn and plays the move knight e4. He says, well, I don't care about the a2 pawn. All I'm looking at is the black king. The king is vulnerable and there will be some mating attacks and mating threats on the black king. So here Mises correctly goes for rook into a2, but let's just say he goes rook g7 and plays passively trying to defend himself. What is going to happen? White simply has knight c5 and should win the game very soon. So he correctly played the move rook into a2, after which now we get the idea of the knight e4 move controlling d6. So now goes rook h7, and after king d8, the king is pushed all the way to the 8th rank. Again, pause the video and try to figure out how white continued. So Rubinstein plays another very good move in this position, d6. And now you will see some mating threats coming on the board. Now with d6, white has an immediate threat of knight f6 and rook h8 checkmate, because all the key squares would be covered by the white pieces. So to stop the knight f6 idea, black goes knight b5, because now if knight f6 is played, the d6 pawn would just be hanging. So here Rubinstein says, well, my king is still left to get into the game, so let's get him into the game. So king c4. Simple idea, king d5, king e6, or even capturing the e5 pawn. So here black plays a very nice move, rook a5, stopping the king entry, because now if white does go with king d5, black has knight c7, double check, and the white king has to retreat back, and black can try to hold this position. Going back, Rubinstein does not play king d5, and now he simply gobbles up the next pawn and equalizes in material. The point is now this rook is no longer on a2 to actually capture the h2 pawn, so the h2 pawn is pretty much safe now. So after rook into b7, black goes knight a3 check, and after king b4, we have a double attack kind of situation here, and rook b5 is pretty much forced, so rook exchange, and this endgame material wise may be equal, but this is a winning endgame for white. All white has to do is go for this e5 pawn, and he has an h pass pawn anyway. So he goes king c5, and if king d7 and king d5, a5, trying to create some counterplay here. And here Rubinstein correctly first gives a check with knight c5, pushes the king behind, and then captures the e5 pawn. And knight c5 also stops the pawn from advancing. That's also an important point. So here king f7 was played and knight b7 was played, and here Mises resigned. Simple reason, because this pawn is just attacked, and if black does go to defend the pawn and advance the pawn, then white simply goes d7 and queening the pawn is unstoppable. Emanuel Lasker, the that time world champion, stated that Rubinstein conducted the endgame of this game with monumental mastery. So this was a beautiful game by Rubinstein, beautiful endgame technique, a masterpiece. So if you guys did enjoy this video, please give us a big thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.